The Hippie Dad Who Never Stopped Writing. How My Father's Letters Taught Me That Love Can Survive Abandonment. When my father and brother set off in the 1967 Dodge Dart with the slant six engine, Paul to start his freshman year at the University of Colorado in Boulder, my father driving him there, I was 13 years old, and I didn't know yet that my father was never coming back. I didn't know how bad things were between my parents. I never heard them fight out loud. I didn't know how intense my father's need to escape the middle-class trap was, how hungry he was to find himself. I didn't know that he'd walk away from the Davis Studio of Music and Dance, a business he'd founded and built, a place he taught kids to play trumpet, piano, guitar, clarinet, and half a dozen other instruments. I had no idea he'd be leaving his job as the band director at 3 different local elementary schools, that he'd walk away from his marriage of 17 years, that he'd drop out of our life in Elbron, New Jersey, and keep heading west after he left Paul in Boulder. Dad ended up at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, with Fritz Perls, and after a month-long encounter group, decided not to come back to me and my mother, not to return to his life in New Jersey. Committed to freedom he was, committed to doing his own thing. He didn't want anyone, especially my mother, controlling him and telling him how to live his life. That summer I turned 14, he became my hippie dad. On one hand, you could definitely say he abandoned me and my mother. Of course he did. But I never felt abandoned by him because he never stopped loving me. I never doubted it, not for a minute. And one reason was his letters. I remember the first one he wrote to me. It arrived in the summer of 1970 while I was at sleepaway camp. Camp Spears for boys and Camp El-Jabbar for girls. We'd just come back from a teen canoeing adventure in Algonquin Provincial Park in Ontario, Canada. When we got back to our base camp in Pennsylvania, there was a letter from my father. I don't remember if it was covered with whimsical pen and ink drawings in watercolor, like so many of my father's letters. Only what it said, that he wasn't coming back to New Jersey, and that he still loved me. He told me that would never change. In the years that followed, whether he was hanging out in the Canary Islands or exploring Africa with his drug dealer friend TJ, or settled at Project Artaud, the first live-work space for artists in San Francisco, a creative community he helped to found, or years later when he lived in snowbound Canada, where he worked for 4 years as a music teacher, or later still when he started law school at Hastings School of Law in San Francisco at 59, my father's letters arrived regularly. They were always handwritten in his left-handed script, illustrated with hand-drawn images, made-up limericks, amusing anecdotes about his life, and once an illustrated 10-page odyssey of the method he used to finally quit smoking. My father's letters were funny, entertaining, quirky, warm, and loving, always one of a kind. During one stretch, he crafted his epistles on long sheets of bright yellow construction paper, then folded them up accordion style and stuffed them into hand-decorated envelopes. Each time my father wrote to me, he asked about my life and always responded to whatever it was I'd last told him. He shared stories from his life, all kinds of stories. What I'm struck by now, rereading them once again half a century after they were written, is that my father always wholly accepted the crazy stages I went through in my early life, the polar opposite of my mother's reaction. This letter, dated April 30th, 1975, was written in response to a cassette tape I recorded and sent to my father in Canada, where he was living at the time. His reply found me at the City of Love and Light in San Antonio, Texas, a novitiate training program I was living in with my brother Paul as we prepared to live in our guru's ashram. I was a passionate, fanatical devotee of Guru Maharaji from the time I was 16 until I left the ashram at 21. I cried as I reread this letter. I know, because he told me years later, that my father wasn't at all happy that both his children were following a guru. But in his letter, he held to his bottom line as a parent, always accepting me for who I was and what I was doing. Dear Laura, your message came through so clearly on the tape. You are a beautiful young girl striving to achieve oneness with God, and you live in a holy company whose entire energy flows in the same direction. This is your entire being and is the central reality of your life. Without being in that life myself and never having gotten into the secret myself, I have an insistent feeling that tells me this is the one lasting love for those who can realize it. For me, I have dabbled on the edges of the spiritual life, have exposed myself to many of the spiritual groups and people, read countless books on these subjects, but so far my actual life is in the physical world, put here by God also, and that's all I can fully relate to. As you know, I have heard Guru Maharaji speak many times, heard Mahatmas, attended satsang, kissed the lotus foot, enjoyed the love-filled atmosphere of premi houses and ashrams, but none of this, including taking knowledge, has made me a believer or follower. So I appreciate the beauty of what you and Paul are finding, but cannot join you except as an admirer and well-wisher. And so I understand that our lives are far apart, and while we have the bond of father and daughter, it is more a memory and something I could feel now and then, that I have a son and daughter somewhere far away, who I could see once or twice a year, and whose reality is the Father in heaven and the Earth Mother and their brothers and sisters of the mission. The only real thing is what's happening right now in each of our lives. Yesterday, my reality was that you had taken half an hour of time and told me where you were and how you feel and that you love me, and it was a rich moment for me. The reality of my life right now is that I am in Saskatchewan and devoting all my energies to teaching a lot of children how to play music. At the time I received this letter, full of acceptance for my choices, my mother was threatening to hire a cult deprogrammer to deprogram me. I can't imagine having two more different parents. In the early years of my correspondence with my father, which began when I was 14 and still living under my mother's roof, she grew enraged whenever he shared too much of his life. Stories about the women he was dating, including sexual innuendos, my mother was sure were not fit for a teenager. In hindsight, I'd have to agree with her assessment, but at the time, I defended my father passionately and condemned her just as passionately. The wife and mother who'd been left behind, the parent who stayed home and paid the bills, the one who went back to graduate school while working full-time, the mother who held steady with the angry, confused daughter who blamed her for everything. Like many teenagers of divorce, I condemned her, the stodgy, abandoned one, and worshipped him, the free spirit who left. It's a great credit to them both that they became friends again later in life. I credit that to my mother, who amid her many flaws, learned how to forgive. Now she's been dead for 12 years. My father's been dead for 25. I'm so happy I kept his letters. I cherish them. No one on earth could have crafted them. No one else loved me without expectations or control. My dad's letters live in a large turquoise plastic box stashed deep in the crawl space under the stairs in my office. Last week I pulled them out again, for the first time in 20 years. It was such a pleasure to have those letters and art-filled envelopes in my hands again, to get a little dose of my remarkable father, the flawed, imperfect man I adored. And just want to say, if you're listening to this, I will put in the show notes a link to the written post, which is full of illustrated examples of his letters, which are definitely worth taking a look at. And here's a writing prompt for you. Tell me about a letter, written, read, sent, or received. Now, would you like to study with me in the new year? I teach ongoing weekly writing classes on Zoom. This means you could attend from anywhere. Admission is on a rolling basis, and there are openings available when classes resume in the new year. I teach 2 different kinds of classes. The first, which meets on Wednesdays, is a writing practice class. In the writing practice class, we write in class to prompts each week and share our work in an intimate circle. The prompt you just read is an example of the type of exercises we do. The Wednesday class is not a feedback or critique-based class. Rather, it's a safe place for self-exploration, expanding creativity, developing a writing practice, and figuring out what it is you want or need to write. It's a great class if you want to explore your writing voice, discover new stories, excavate new memories, or simply have a place where you know you'll write every week in beloved community. The camaraderie and intimacy of the class is palpable. It provides my students with a cherished oasis in the middle of their week. There are no prerequisites to attend. All are welcome. There are current openings, and there's a new student special available now. Classes resume January 7th. You get to choose your own start date. You can contact me through the website if you're interested. You could learn more about joining the Wednesday class at the link in the show notes. The second type of class I teach are feedback classes designed for people already engaged in a narrative writing project, a memoir, a novel, a set of essays, a book of family history, a nonfiction project. You could be working on standalone pieces or a book-length manuscript, or trying to figure out exactly where your work is headed. In these classes, people bring in work they've written at home to be critiqued by me and by a supportive group of peers. I teach the skills of giving feedback, and people become deeply invested in each other's work. The class becomes a richly productive, creative, supportive community. I teach 2 ongoing feedback classes each week. Students enroll for a series and then can renew. One feedback class meets Thursday morning Pacific time, and the other meets Thursday evening Pacific time. My feedback classes are not for beginning writers. A writing sample is required so I could make sure people would be served by the class. If you'd like to get on the wait list for one of these classes, let me know. You could learn more about applying for the feedback class at the link in the show notes. And remember, every time you click the heart, leave a comment, or share a post, you're making it easier for new readers to discover the writer's journey.